All right. So, step 6 says we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. So, right away, I want to say that if you're hearing this and whatever you're at this point of the series or whatever, you're not defective. You're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. And I'm saying this knowing full well that you might have some wildly serious to seemingly moderate addictions, compulsions, bad habits, having done things that have hurt people in various ways. You're not broken. You're not defective. There some people in the old tradition might just say like, well, these are just words. It's just the language that they used. So we uphold this tradition and we keep using these words like defects and whatnot. And yeah, no, sure, they're just words, but we have better words. I'm a word person. I'm a writer in my part as a hobby. I'm a writer. I don't want to give the impression that I'm some professional writer here and start a whole thing, but I think words are important. We have so many words available to us, and we have ones that are the right word for the right purpose. So I think something like saying adaptive mechanisms, coping strategies, rather than defects of character. And there's also something to be said about defects of character. There's something very permanent about that idea, isn't it? It suggests that there's this permanent defect of your solidly defined character, something that is inherently you. And I personally reject that entirely. Like I'm someone that follows Buddhism, and in Buddhist practice, there's one of the three characteristics of existence is anatta, which is not self. This is commonly confused with the idea of no self, which is kind of just like a belief or an idea that often people adopt because it's. But the idea of not self is a very practical tool because when and I'll use it in the context of defects, of adaptive mechanisms, and to flesh this out a little bit. So we look at, one of my, I have a few core mechanisms, and one of them is pride. And so if I look at this pride, sometimes it's present, sometimes it's not at all. Some people would say like, oh, it's just like it's there, but it's hibernating, or it's always there, but you just don't see it. And that's like, that's one viewpoint, sure. But like based on this idea that there's no solid self that the Buddha taught, I believe that just like sometimes the conditions arise that pride is present, and other times that's not present, so it doesn't exist currently. Because if my self is actually just a fluid process, which I believe it is, then there is no truth to that solid, steady, static character. I think this also makes room, at least it does for me, to really believe that I can be free of these things, because it's and especially from a place of not needing divine intervention, because, the step was written in the 30s. These people were often very monotheist based, the Judaic religious structures, believing that a deity would, by force of supernatural power, take your unchangeable character and change it, make you new, as they say. He made me new, and that really seems to have been the case for some people. It seems. Many others I've encountered say that, like, he took the defect and then it came back, or they'll say he took the defect and I took it back. Suggesting this kind of like interplay between God and self. And so my belief is that I have karma in the Pali, and basically karma is that cause and effect and momentum. These are the simplest ways to explain karma. And based on all my past actions, and arguably actions of past lives, but that's irrelevant to this conversation. based on my past actions, I have a certain amount of momentum and going in a certain direction. So for a long time, I had a lot of momentum propelling me, compelling me towards using drugs, towards using sex, towards using food, towards trying to control people. I had a lot of momentum in that direction. And then, so of course, when I tried to apply the brakes and stop doing these things, there's still a lot of forward momentum. So it felt like, I often like the image of like running at a full speed and then just like trying to abruptly stop. Like, how would that look? It would probably look like someone falling flat on their face. Like, so typically, like in that case, you slowly run slower, then walk, and then stop, right? And although like like eventually with drug use, I did stop and not return to it, over 10 years ago. But it took me 7 years to get to that point of trying to stop and then starting again and then stopping for a little bit longer and starting again. Stopping for a little bit longer. So in truth, there's just all this momentum with all these patterns of habit, adaptive mechanisms. There's all this pride momentum. But that doesn't mean that it's a stable, fixed part of my character. It's just that I haven't slowed down enough yet for it to completely disappear. And there's so much momentum that it sometimes arises again. I find this an encouraging way to look at these things. I find this encouraging because again, with with the way I view it, like there is of course a component of a power outside of myself in this process, as the earlier steps have said. But the power is also connected to my input, my effort. I have to want and apply energy towards change for it to happen in my life. I don't believe that it's just that I wish for this to happen and some external force changes me. I believe that I act in new ways. So I act with humility. And so for me, like the pride is really like being overly concerned with the way other people see me, the opinions of others. To me, that's pride. Getting wrapped up in how other people view me, right? So, to just move in a new direction, right? And a big part of this, as someone who's got deep codependency, is to validate myself, affirm myself, because that diminishes my pride. Because I was so dependent on getting validation from other people that if I, sometimes people would give it to me sometimes, and then when they didn't, I would feel empty because I was so dependent on them. My pride was hurt. They took it away now. So instead, learning to validate myself was this moving in another direction, telling myself, "Oh, hey, dude, you're doing well. You're good at this. This is good work. Hey, look at that. You did an act of generosity today. Good job." Things like this. And then, like just the process of engaging further in these tools and these steps, living a new way that diminishes my old way, that changes my momentum. So all that being said, returning to what the step says is that we became entirely ready to have God remove the patterns. So it's not actually asking us yet to do anything in this step except become willing. And so willingness is often a principle associated with this step. Honesty is associated with it. Humility is associated with it. And so the key part is, like really taking a look at some of these patterns. And it's very much like step one was. We looked at the behavior that we wanted to change, and we examined all the ways in which it was making our life unmanageable, unbearable, untenable, and use that as motivation to go forth, to generate willingness to let go, to walk in a new direction. Step 6 is very much like this as well. For me, like things like I said, pride, arrogance, pugnacity, which isn't a very familiar word a lot of the time, and it just means wanting to fight everybody all the time, wanting to argue, deeply wanting to argue. And lust, so identifying these, and there's many others. That's just a few of my kind of really core ones. I've found that there are a few patterns that kind of can be the linchpins for a bunch of others. Contempt is another really big one of mine. So these others often, like pride, which often can lead to timidity, to vanity, etc., etc. I won't tell you my whole inventory. You can write your own. But there's, identifying the ways in which they hurt me, right? Because pride, for a bit of it, is that like pride keeps me isolated. It keeps me seeing people as tools rather than beings with their own needs and wants. It cuts me off from being able to be compassionate. It keeps me, it leads to pugnacity, because when people then, when people don't meet that hope or that expectation of validating me, then I'll often want to start a fight with them, or like blame them, or become contemptuous of them and try and push them away from me because they didn't then satisfy that craving in me. So they hurt me, so I'll push them away in whatever way, whatever means necessary, right? So I started to look at all these ways, and I'm like, man, like this is really hurting me and people I care about. And so this is the thing that generates the willingness to then have the patterns removed in the seventh step. And I do find it so interesting, right? And I think that really points to how important this piece is that it is separated in two steps. And I believe in the original process, it was one step, because there was only actually 6 steps to begin with. I'm not history savvy enough to know that whole thing, but I believe these two were connected. But the fact that they separated them really speaks to me. It speaks to like how important it is to really get a clear picture as to how these patterns are causing harm. To really dig into it, not just to brush by it, not just to brush by, like, because sometimes it's taught that way, right? You do your step 5 and then, you just like pray for a minute, and that sticks, pray, and that's 6 and 7, and then you move on to the amends process. But I think it's really, I think it really speaks to the fact that like digging into these to really like concretize how these patterns hurt others and ourselves can carry us forward into really remembering and returning to that bit about like, oh, the thing's removed and then I pick it up again. This reminds me why not to pick it up again. And that doesn't mean that I'll do it perfectly, of course. That doesn't mean that if I get really, that I've become 100% willing in the moment of step 6, then I will remain that way. No, chances are you're going to have some momentum and you're going to have to get willing again. But this is definitely an ongoing process. Like as my defect, see, it's just so in me, this word defects. But I mean, at this point, you understand what I mean. These patterns are so in me that I keep returning. But then I keep returning to this process of letting go and becoming willing and letting go. And I really think, despite that my path is not one of the monotheist deities, I think there's something really profound to be spoken of that. I think there's a lot of power in that process, in that path of, people that are deeply invested in prayer and turning it over to their higher power, their like higher power that is a being, and constantly asking their higher power to free them of this. Like that, to me, it works the same way for myself, because like it's like for me, I pray, and it doesn't matter who it's to. Like for me, the prayer is as much about just like setting that intention of relinquishment, of renouncement, of renunciation. May I be willing to let go of pride today. May I be willing to have arrogance removed from my personality today. May I be willing to have contempt removed from my habit energy, from my patterns, from my way of living. And returning to these prayers, returning to my intention, can give me forward momentum. And practically, there are many people that would take the approach of like, oh, I really only have about 5 character patterns. There's about 5. And okay, I think that's a bit short-sighted personally. Right? That's just my opinion. I think that's a disservice. I've seen that approach, and I think it's full of I think there's a lot missing in that. I think there's a lot more nuance. Like often people will say like, oh, like, or even just summarize it as like, yeah, I'm just full of fear, and that's the whole thing. And like, yeah, that's probably the root of a lot of it. But I think there's a lot of value. Like I personally like have an identified list of like maybe 20 to 30 different patterns. You could probably list them all. Like I'm not gonna. It'll take about 5 minutes. But I actually refer to Russell Brand's step guide, and he gave a list that I adopted myself. So shout out to Russell Brand and his influence on my life. But there was a list of that many patterns, and I just and went through each one. And although a lot are related, and there are the linchpins, I personally think that like you can't overdo it on building awareness of your patterns and building awareness of yourself. Like I think like the deeper look. I mean, like we refer back to step 4 that said searching and fearless inventory. So that's not like skimming the surface and seeing what I see easily. I'm searching, like I'm deeply searching and fearless. So I'm not like worried that it's going to take too much effort or too much time or that I'll miss something or that I won't be able to see something. But I look deeply. And I think the more I look at it, the more motivated I am to change. The more motivated I am to try something different. Because it takes a ton of energy to live a new way. Like on a neuroscience level, we have these, especially if you're older than 4 and you're listening to this, like, I mean, I hope you are. Dear God, I hope you are. that we have these pathways grooved in our brain, early on, and energy just wants to go through those grooves. Like it takes calories, it takes energy, it takes attention to burn new grooves into your brain, because that's what we're doing here. Like we're literally burning new pathways into our hardware. That takes energy. So, and I think that's too why like so much of the resistance will arise, and so much of these reasons, we can fabricate all these reasons why not to do this stuff. Why to take the easy way, why to take the short way, why to take the 12 hours through the 12 steps route, like just one and done, like, or only visit the steps once. A lot of people say like, oh, you only have to do this once, and then you just live in 10, 11, 12. But I don't think that's the most useful way. I think there's always more will be revealed. So all that said, if you're at this place and you've started looking at yourself and in the process of change and you're finding it hard, I hear you, and it is hard. I hope this talk, can inspire some motivation in you, because I know I need it. Like, there's that saying that like recovery is like a shower. Yesterday's shower won't keep you clean, so like you keep working at it. And then my old beloved mentor Todd used to say to me like, recovery is also like paddling a kayak against the current. As soon as you stop paddling, you start flowing backwards a little bit. So, you just got to keep a steady foot on it, You don't there's no need to burn ourselves out and like pedal like a maniac or paddle like a maniac. But it's steady. It's a steady progress. And I would also say that I really hope you keep compassion for yourself when you're looking at all these patterns. Because, like I started off, you're not defective, you're not broken, there's nothing wrong with you. This is just stuff that you've learned. We've all learned these things. We've all been conditioned to act in these ways throughout our lives. Like all these patterns of mine, of yours, of ours, they were all ways that we learned to keep ourselves safe. And I think if you look at this, if you look at your own, you'll see the truth of that. Because like I said, for me, like with arrogance, I pushed, eventually it led me to pugnacity and pushing people away because they hurt me, and I didn't want to get hurt, and I didn't know how to talk about those things with people. I just got hurt and didn't know how to deal with it. So all these mechanisms, it was part of myself trying to keep me safe and take care of me. And I think like really like that also is a lot of, it opens up my heart if I can view it this way. Because it's not that I'm bad or defective. It's just that like, oh, like I learned some ways that aren't super helpful, but they were the best I could do at the time. So thank you. Thank you, self, for adapting in the way you did to take care of me in the way you did to get me to this point. but now I'm ready for something new. Now I'm ready for a new way. Now I'm ready to live with kindness and with honesty and with open-heartedness and with humility and with integrity, with curiosity, with compassion, with care, with courage. I have a new blueprint of how to live now. And it will take time and practice, but it is possible. I'm here to tell you that it's possible. Many of us have done it. Many of us are doing it. You can do it too. May you be well.